Welcome to the broadcast, my darlings. I'm going to be referring to my clipboard and notes quite a bit more than usual during this broadcast. I always need bullet points and prompting from my notes to make sure I don't forget anything, but I've got more than usual this time, so forgive me if I'm glancing down a lot. I'm not reading from a script. I never script anything. I just need the prompting, because we cover quite a lot, don't we? And today we are going to be covering a few things, including Harry's appearance fee, which has been exclusively shared with me from those in the know for a recent appearance, what he requested and what was actually declined. I've spoken to an associate who is well integrated into the world of polo, specifically German polo. And there are rather a lot of myths about polo if you're not very well acquainted with that world. It's not all glamour, it's not all fizz and sparkle and glitter and lust. There are moments of that, but that's for the awards, that's for the tournaments. It is not for the day-to-day life of an equestrian or a fan of the polo world. Most of the time it's mud stains and manure, my dear. Stinky business, and of course for the socialising. People love to hang out with each other, make friends, and talk, and gossip, and share whispers. Yes, that's right, and the whispers are shared, including with me. Guilty! Guilty as charged. Well, I will say, I'll just throw it down, there's nothing unusual or shady that's being uncovered here. I'm sharing this with you just simply in the spirit of curiosity for those of you who might find it interesting. And actually what I've discovered could actually reflect positively on him or negatively, depending on how one fills in the gaps. For legal reasons, the exchange and the figure that I'm about to impart or disclose to you are what I have been told, and the source I believe to be trustworthy, very trustworthy, so I believe it. But I am not privy to the exchange. I didn't see the communication involved, so I'm not stating it as a fact. It is merely what I have been told, so I want to make that very clear. The Invictus Games coincided with the European Championship hosted by Polo Club Düsseldorf. There was an overlap of a few days. It was coming up to the end of the Polo Championships as Invictus was beginning, but there was an overlap and there was a chance for a longer overlap. And Invictus received huge promotion within Düsseldorf. If you were there, you know. If you live in the city, you know. Huge promotion all over the place. And so much so that Prince Harry was invited to the club as a spectator. Now, first of all, I will say that I think it is unfortunate that he was invited, that his presence was thought of as desirable by the Polo Club, but there's no point in shrinking away from it. It is what it is, and it is understandable that his presence brings attention and publicity, whether good or bad, and that is the way of the world. Well, Harry's management responded to the offer. They politely thanked. They thanked for the invitation, and they added that Harry would be delighted to attend. He would love to come and watch as a spectator to the match and guzzle champers and have a good old shake in return for a donation. In return for a donation, my dear, to one of his foundations of $70,000. Now, that is the word that was used to describe to me one of his foundations, but I believe it might have been a paraphrase. I do not know if that foundation was the entity known as Archewell or the charity known as Centre Barley. It could have been either of those or something else. I haven't been told that. Either way, this amount exceeded what his presence would contribute to the event, so discussions came to a close then and there. They were not going to stump up 70 grand, so at least, you know, I find it a bitter pill to swallow that he's still invited to these things in society, as he was in Dusseldorf. You know, these were very glittering championships, by the way. For those of you who don't know about the world of polo, these were the European World Championships, and they're a huge, glittering affair, and they are the kind of affair that Harry would very much enjoy being part of, actually. And one would have thought that actually, even though his schedule was obviously tight, he was focused on Invictus, that he might have wanted to be there without any sort of adornments or gifts to one of his enterprises. One would have thought that. So presumably they saw it as the decent thing to do to extend the invitation while he was in town. You know, it is, I suppose you could say, a matter of courtesy to invite visiting royalty to these kind of things. But he wasn't going to have it unless there was a donation made to one of his involvement. And I'm not saying that I wouldn't do the same. Others might think it greedy, but Harry knows he is a commodity. He understands that, and he wouldn't have been invited if the event organisers didn't consider his presence somewhat beneficial. So he sets a boundary and he sets an exchange. And I understand that. I could support that. I believe in boundaries, because you give an inch, people take a mile, even when you set up boundaries. So I believe in that. And in this case, it was a case of, well, I'll rub your back if you rub mine. Especially if your name's Cheesy Nachos. No, that's my imagination. Going into overdrive. Well, you see, when Prince William and Prince Harry play polo, official tournaments, it's for charity and donations, you see. That is. But what is unusual this time is that this was solely for watching as a spectator. So it's one thing to say, yes, well, I'll come along and play and have a game and get involved for 70 grand. In this circumstance, it was merely for being there, watching. One would hope enjoying the surrounds, the socialising, the bubbles, whatever. For enjoying, but no. I, like you, would be curious to know exactly how this fee of 70 grand for a couple of hours watching horses, things being knocked about on sticks, I would love to know how it would have been divided and which entity it would have gone to. We can only guess at that. But we at least know. First of all, I don't know if this sort of request has ever been shared before. Obviously, his fee would change depending on the circumstance, what was expected, but you know, I am revealing to you that his presence can be bought if this is true. I mean, it's not exactly something that we didn't expect or suspect, but if what my sources tell me is true, then yes, his presence can be bought. That is if, for legal reasons, I will restate that. I am relaying what I've been told, not what I know as fact. But if he is maximising the use of his time and his earning capability for the greater good, then in some ways he's to be applauded. If it is, let's say, for instance, that the vast majority of that, well, all of it, in fact, goes to Centre Barley for sitting around watching polo, then wonderful. And, you know, I understand that 70k is small beans, small potatoes in these kind of worlds, but it's still a substantial amount for a charity. So, you know, what I do object to him doing is all this kind of merching, even if it's on behalf of worthy causes and charities under the banner of Duke of Sussex. You know, this is what sticks in my craw and what continues to rankle me. He should do it under the auspices of Harry Markle. Let's not make bones about it, my dear. He ain't a Windsor, he ain't a Mountbatten, he ain't even a Sussex, he's a Markle. And even there, you know, she segregated herself from the rest of her family. Ragland. Harry Ragland. Let's call it what it is. I have also been informed that when Harry first moved to Montecito, he approached the polo club in Santa Barbara and he very politely inquired if he could join. He was very unassuming, I'm told. He didn't dwell on his status. Hail fellow, well met. That's what he was. But the Duchess of Sussex. But the Duchess of Sussex, slightly different story there, my dear. I will quote from my source. However, Meghan is not liked. Meghan is not... And this is a very erudite, savvy source, by the way. It's not somebody who jumps on the bandwagon of Harry and Meghan hating or anything like that. Rather like me, they can reflect soberly and see the light and shade. But they tell me, however, I've got to stop laughing. However, Meghan is not liked since the incident with the request of security people having to be there and making a big fuss about a groom taking a photograph of her. Have you heard anything about this? I don't know if it's been in the papers or the press or the gossip forums or whatever. It's the first I've heard about it. Apparently she made a big fuss about a groom taking photographs of her. We all know what she looks like. Thought you liked your photo being taken, love, when you were a suitcase girl and when you were modelling for, who was it? Some American enterprise. Modelling, prancing around. That ain't modelling, dear. I could tell you a bit about modelling. That is not a model. Honestly, that word gets bandied about these days. Makes Stella Tennant turn in her grave. She went on to say, polo players value their grooms and know their worth. They do not consider them second-class people. Perhaps the insinuation that the Duchess was being a bit high and mighty. No, polo players do not consider grooms second-class people. Ask Sasha Walpole. Ask Sasha Walpole, my love. She'll attest to that, won't she? She was taken very much into the fold, the royal fold, and Harry was taken into hers. Imagine it, my dears. The royal family was only one withdrawal away, and probably a couple of haystacks, from Archie and Lilibet Mountbatten Walpole. And actually that would have been a blessed relief for all of us, wouldn't it? What a wonderful Duchess she would have made over Meghan Sussex. Our Princess Sasha. She would have been wonderful. She's down to earth. She gets it. She's respectful. She doesn't sell you out. She is the real deal. Or the Walpole Windsors. That could have been another iteration of it. Wonderful gal, but too good for Harry. Really, too good for Harry. When at the club, I'm continuing to quote my source now, when at the club, members simply want to enjoy themselves, play, take care of the horses, have a barbecue after training. It's low-key. Nobody wants an army of security there. Exactly, my dear, the amount of security that they insist on having when you see the King and William going out for jogs and walks without worrying quite so much about it all, and when it's actually the Sussexes that put themselves in jeopardy with their own revelations. You see this kind of vulgarity in the clauses they make and their privacy demands, such as at Public School 123 in New York. You know that time when Meghan turned up on a publicity jamboree dripping in designer rags to read a dreadful book of so-called poetry that no child would ever choose to read or endure. The pictures were nice. The illustrations, I rather enjoyed them in the stench, the wench, the rotten old woodwormed bench. I rather enjoyed the pictures. It would have been lovely with them alone and without those juvenile, teenage, angsty scrawlings that no child would ever want to read. Kids get it. They know what hooks. They know quality when they see it, and that's why no child would ever ask for the bench by the Duchess of Sussex, my dear. This was at one of the poorest and most deprived neighbourhoods and schools in New York, 95% of those kids were described as having economic hardship. Well, requests under the Freedom of Information rules have revealed this week that advisors from Archewell demanded that the school sign a clause banning anyone from making negative comments. Really? Including the children, so I'm hearing. The visit was spearheaded by Toya Holness of their PR team, and it was planned 6 months in advance, this trip. But 3 days before the appearance, we're told that Archewell representatives emailed the Department of Education with an appearance release, including a gagging clause, and asking them to run it by their lawyers. I mean, is this really necessary? We're talking about some poor school for pauper children, some workhouse kids, and she turns up there dripping in maroon rags, some kind of burgundy sleeping blanket, reciting this illiterate tripe, and she's so secure and confident in her talent as an authoress that they all have to sign these gagging orders, if what we read in the press is true. It remains unclear whether or not the contracts were signed, but bravo Danielle Filson, who was the New York School's press secretary. She queried the language of the Department of Education's press release, and she wanted to take out any references to the bench. She said she wanted to make it less promotion-y. So good for you, Danielle Filson. The Daily Mail went one further, and they said that this request from the Harkles related also to any posts on social media, now or in the future, making sure that everything was all checked off there and that it was watertight, nobody could say a thing. No words of disparagement. The Freedom of Information requests also reveal that their team banned 4 British newspapers from attending an event at the World Trade Center, even though it's a publicly owned building. We are going to turn to the subject of Balmoral and also the issue of Councillors of State. I told you some weeks ago that my understanding and information was that there was and is a tug of war behind the scenes going on, involving not just family members but households, a power struggle in regard to Prince Harry's accommodation while he is on UK soil and the logistics of such visits now and ongoing. And also bear in mind, by the way, that there are potential tax implications of the number of nights that the Duke of Sussex is able to spend in the kingdom with any prudency, because, it means it must be on his schedule rather than in accordance with anybody else's. He's got a certain number of nights that he deigns to grace the kingdom with his presence, and if it doesn't fit in with the king's schedule or the queen's schedule, then, blow them. So, The Sun recently carried a story this week. Harry turned down an invitation to Balmoral. No, that's not quite right, The Sun. Actually, under closer scrutiny, the information that I imparted a few weeks ago, which was that it was Harry's camp doing the reaching out, that was a whisper I shared to you. Actually, that is more accurate, my dear, which has since been backed up by the Telegraph, who said the Duke's office first contacted Buckingham Palace. The Duke's office first contacted Buckingham Palace after confirming his attendance at the Well Child Awards. This communication said that Harry would love to see his father. This is rich. He would love to see his father and stay with him on the 7th of September. This was after the Well Child Awards, including his security detail, entourage, whatever it is, my dear. He was told then to submit a formal request so that his team provided specific details and timings about this, because he had a 24-hour window to be here in the kingdom. Buckingham Palace responded. They explained that the king would be at Balmoral and that Harry would be welcome to join him there if he wished to. Now, The reason that this is rich when he says he'd love to see his father and stay with him on the 7th is because Prince Harry would be keenly aware exactly where His Majesty would have been on that date, because it's tradition going back to time immemorial for the monarch to be up there in Scotland. He would have been keenly aware. He would have been there himself, visiting Granny year after year. So if you would love to see him, Harry, if you would love to see your father, perhaps you could have made a 2-night provision so that you could have travelled up to Balmoral. I understand maybe this might not have been possible. He had Wellchild, there he had Invictus. Wellchild could have been relocated, or if they had enough time in advance, rescheduled, whatever. But don't pee on my leg and tell me it's raining, my dear. Don't tell me that you get in touch. Harry would love to see his father and stay with him. Well, he knows that's not possible. No, Harry was getting in touch because he wanted to kip. He wanted to kip in Windsor or in somewhere near the Wellchild Awards, not because he wanted to see his father. Well, both camps agreed it was not practical, and then the Duke's team asked for accommodation at Windsor or somewhere else. Well, if that's not possible, do you mind, giss a room while we're in town? But he was told, no, it's too late, dearie, and impossible to arrange. What a shame. And that actually you've got to see the humour in that. Is there room for us at Windsor Castle? The one with 1,000 rooms, over 1,000 rooms, 300 fireplaces. No, sorry. Sorry, no vacancies. Too late to arrange. I mean, how difficult is it really to arrange and prepare for a couple of rooms for you and your biggies? Well, that was the palace's response. Sorry, your name's not down, you're not coming in. Then we are told that Harry was forced to stay in a hotel. Oh, poor Harry. Which added a complicated security element to their logistics. They couldn't fight their way out of a paper bag, could they, these security elements? Hardly Houdini territory. Well, he was given permission to visit the late Queen's final resting place, as we all know and saw, at the chapel. I'm not suggesting for one moment that he was courting publicity on the anniversary of the late Queen's death to land on the front pages and attempt to upstage other members of the royal family. I would never do him such a disservice, but recollections of others might vary. I'm not responsible for them. But how very convenient for him that he was snapped. Now, there are some conflicting claims emanating from the palace at the moment. There are whispers emerging behind the scenes that there are ongoing discussions. We all thought this was all over and done with regards to Harry's accommodation, but ongoing discussions involving the possibility of leasing a property on the royal estate to the Sussexes ongoing. Yes, these whispers are bubbling up. A spokesman has denied this, let me make that clear, denied it and said that temporary accommodation is likely to be made available to them when feasible for short visits, that kind of courtesy. But gossip is persisting, and it's coming from sources that are being taken quite seriously, I've got to tell you. Kensington Palace is said to have been looked at as an option. The Waleses have a home there, yes they do, and a private office, but they spend most of their time in Windsor since moving the family there, most of the time there. And also one can go for years without seeing a fellow neighbour and chancing upon them at Kensington Palace, so hopefully it wouldn't be too awkward. But, somewhere on the royal estate as a pied-à-terre to lay Harry's head when he's in town. I've also been hearing that quite a few, including courtiers and advisors in the household, think that the king was actually rash to evict Harry from Frogmore. Now, the Sussexes, I am told, would have been very happy to keep it as their royal base, and it would have solved security problems. There's no denying it was very satisfying to hear that they'd been evicted and the frog had leapt from the moor, so to speak. out. It's very satisfying initially, but the ongoing questions of where to put them do continue to cause a lot of headaches. And it's created a situation that is vague for both Harry and the royal family, with no official residence in the UK for a Councillor of State. This is one of the issues. Councillors of State must be domiciled in the United Kingdom. Ostensibly, Prince Harry retains his British domicile as his domicile of origin, and there is often some confusion about this issue. Domicile is not to be confused with residence or residing in the United Kingdom. To be domiciled here doesn't mean that you have a domestic setup here and now. Well, depending on what you are defining, if you are speaking with regards to law, to common law, or to the English vocabulary. This is where there are vague areas and grey areas. But to domicile and to reside are two separate things. Under the 1937 Act, a Councillor of State must be domiciled in some part of the United Kingdom. And in this regard, the concept of domicile is derived from common law. There is an explanatory note attached to the Councillor of State Bill that says, everyone receives a domicile at birth. This is known as a domicile of origin. On this basis, the Duke of Sussex is eligible to act as a Councillor of State, as his domicile of origin remains in England and Wales, despite him residing in the United States. And other working definitions of what it means to domicile include the country that a person treats as their permanent home, or lives in, or has a substantial connection with. So there are a few various strands that one can cling on to. Is it Harry's permanent home here? No. Does he live here? No. Does he have a substantial connection with? Yes. As the second son to a king, he does have a substantial connection with this land. And you might argue it, someone else might argue it, but somebody who was not going to argue it on this occasion was the king. The king decided to keep Harry on as a Councillor of State when he acceded the throne last year, but he made the addition of Edward and Anne. And actually, the additions that he made for the Duke of Edinburgh and the Princess Royal were for life. They are Councillors of State for life. And George and Charlotte and Louis, if they are made Councillors of State, they will potentially replace those who are further down the line when they reach the age of 21 years old. So there will be a knock-on effect in a few years' time. For those who aren't aware, those 7 Councillors of State, as it stands at the moment, are the Queen Consort, the Prince of Wales, the Duke of Sussex, the Duke of York, Princess Beatrice, and then the Duke of Edinburgh and the Princess Royal. That's 7 of them. But Councillors of State are appointed in pairs. This is what some people don't understand. They are always appointed in pairs, and the likelihood of Harry, Andrew, or even Beatrice used in such a fashion is extremely remote. I mean, it's not going to happen. I'm telling you, it's not going to happen, so you needn't worry about that. But for the sake of speaking immaculately, let's just say that it's very remote. Possible, but very remote, which is one reason that they haven't been removed, along with the desire not to escalate tension. Remember, we're dealing with a real trickster in the form of Harry, especially. We're dealing with a real character, with a real fiery temperament who wreaks revenge, wants revenge for every perceived slight, even the ones that don't happen and are all in his imagination. So can you imagine if it was an actual demotion of sorts? But the dilemma remains, because Harry does not appear worthy of the appointment or suitable to deputise, and nor does Prince Andrew in many people's eyes, but I'm not here to discuss the Duke of York on this particular occasion. The question of Harry's domicile of origin and domicile of choice, because it could come to that in the future if he elects for the USA, well, it's a headache for the royal household. Not least because the law neglects to anticipate a second son surrendering their royal duty. I mean, that is how inconceivable and how ignominious the whole idea of that ever happening was. Harry really upset the apple cart there, didn't he? Because he's such a renegade and a maverick that he's trod the sort of treacherous path and territories of betrayal that very few had before him, so they didn't even conceive of this happening or make legal preparations for it. And by the way, councils of state, you have your regencies for backups. Councils of state didn't really pack the same punch until the last century, actually. I think around about the 1930s. Simply because, for one reason, is that the monarch didn't tend to spend much time abroad. They didn't have planes, for one thing, aeroplanes. So, popping over to Australia for the odd trip and needing councillors of state in their absence wasn't quite such a requirement. But regardless, this is dodgy ground on the matters of constitutional law. And there are quite a lot of constitutional experts out there with twitchy feet about this whole affair. Because you have to cross the T's and dot the I's. This is the thing that's concerning to some of us. Instead of leaving things to linger in the fields of vagueness. The palace goes to pains to ensure that William is on British terra firma whenever the king is out of the country. You notice that, for example, they ensured that William was back here when he returned from New York last week. He was back here on the same day that their majesties went to France, but they had to ensure that he was back here, feet on the ground, before their majesties departed. He had to be here. It's coordinated. And incidentally, while fact-checking for this broadcast, I noticed that the royal website, on the section of Councillors of State, is not updated to include the addition of Edward and Anne. It's about time they got round to that. I also looked on Debrett's, and we all love Debrett's. They have updated their page, but they do say councillors have to be 21, 18 for the heir to the throne, and domiciled in the United Kingdom. Their words are domiciled in the United Kingdom, not domiciled of origin from the United Kingdom. This is just Debrett's take on it. They are rather an authority, though, on royal protocol, but they say domiciled in the kingdom. That could be interpreted various ways. They say the Duke of Sussex is still eligible as he maintains a home here. Perhaps they know something I don't. Am I missing something? He maintains a home here? How is that at this point in time? After Queen Elizabeth II died, only William was left in the pool, really, of councillors of state until Edward and Anne were roped in, because as consort, Camilla accompanies the king wherever he goes, but especially when they're going abroad, and she will continue to do so as long as she's able. Harry, Andrew, and Beatrice don't carry out public duties. So do you see that leaves William alone as an active councillor of state until the addition of Edward and Anne. I have heard calls from some quarters for the Princess of Wales to be made a councillor of state so that the pair of them can act, if necessary, in tandem. But the addition of Edward and Anne was seen as the most elegant solution of the time, albeit rather temporary. And diaries are likely to be being coordinated at this very moment to ensure that 2 out of the 3, William, Edward and Anne, the active members of the Councils of State, will be available to act during any period of their appointment. So at least 2 out of 3 of all of them need to be available at all times, and diaries are coordinated, bearing that in mind. The monarch's constitutional and legal obligations include such things as the granting of royal assent to legalisation, the appointment of ministers, the ratification of treaties, and the appointment of judges and diplomats. And many of these obligations require the personal signature of the monarch, and that personal signature, you always see Charles R, Charles Rex, and with the late Queen it was Charles Elizabeth Regina ER. They are known as the Royal Sign Manual. That is the specific name of that personal signature, the Royal Sign Manual. And it might surprise you to know that during the reign of the late Queen Elizabeth II, Councillors of State were appointed over 100 times. Granted, it was over a long period of time, 70 years, but 100 times, in order to facilitate her extensive travel overseas, mainly. And as I say, they act in pairs. One of those regular pairings was the late Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, together with the late Princess Margaret Rose. They acted in tandem, actually, in response, for example, to a snap election. I think it was Ted Heath that called an election in 1974, a snap election, and the late Queen Elizabeth was in Australia. So Queen Mum and old Maggie Rose, they had to fill in. It required permission from the Queen from Australia, but they filled in and did their bit as Councillors of State. The monarch as head of state is a central part of this kingdom's constitutional arrangements. People don't understand how central the monarch is. It is pivotal to the machinery of government that the royal authority is always on hand to grant formal and final legal approval to many decisions made by the government and Parliament. There have been similar conundrums in history. There was one with George Lascelles, the 7th Earl of Harwood, who was grandson of Queen Mary, son of Princess Mary, Princess Royal of the time, who was married to the 6th Earl of Harwood. And I think when he was born, he was 6th in line to the throne, but obviously he moved back. He was the only one that was appointed to Councillors of State who was not a consort, a prince, or a princess. He made it merely by being an earl. But I think he was the only one in history that did. And he was appointed on 2 or 3 occasions, I think, during the 40s and 50s, don't quote me, but at least a couple of occasions there. And he was floated as a potential addition when the Regency Acts of that time were in draft form, but it was decided that he was too remote a figure from royal life, from public consciousness, I should say, from the line of succession, and it was thought eventually that people might begin questioning royal involvement altogether. If such, remember then the pool in the 30s and 40s was actually much smaller than it became in 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. The fabulous era of a trillion royals on the balcony and everything. It hasn't always been that way. It goes in and out. So what we're seeing now with a smaller, slimmed down monarchy isn't the only time in history. Most of us want them to extend those boundaries because it might not be too prudent, but it's not the first time in history. But everything is much too much up in the air for my liking. As I say, it's about crossing the T's and dotting the I's and wrapping things up. It might have been elegant, as some have said, to bring in Edward and Anne and not just dismiss Harry and Andrew from their duties as councillors, but actually decisive action is also elegant and being bold, because in my personal opinion, Prince Harry forfeited his right to that claim to be appointed Councillor of State. And he's just turned 39, his 40th birthday's around the corner. I think that would be the perfect opportunity to take his 70 grand public appearance fee while His Majesty the King appoints his beloved daughter-in-law, the Princess of Wales, as a new Council of State, and sets the Duke of Sussex free. Freedom. Taste the freedom, Harold. But it's food for thought, so get munching on it, King Charles, because we haven't had the last of this. These are loose ends that need tying up and sorting out instead of lingering like some foul odour. Some foul Montecito odour. Hooey, my dudes. Well, thank you for joining me. I will see you next time. Extra special thanks to my source, my whisperer from the polo world. Leave me a nice fruity thought and chuck a tip my way. The tip jar is in the description box below if you would like to treat me to an iced bun. Ta-ra, my dears. Toodle pip.